Hello, and welcome to our event today with Kate Bowler and Anne Lamott. My name is Louisa Smith, and I'm the buying director from Book Passage. We would first like to thank all of you for tuning in for this wonderful event. We know you have lots of options for ways to spend a beautiful sunny Tuesday, and we so appreciate your supporting Book Passage and these incredible authors by choosing to spend your time with us. Book Passage has a robust event program, and we are now holding events both in-store and online. I hope you'll have a moment to take a look at our event calendar located on our website to find out about all the exciting events we have coming this fall. Book Passage is able to offer these events in no small part due to the support of our customers. So thank you. We will be posting a link for the book that has brought us together here today, No Cure for Being Human. Its pub date is today, so a huge happy pub day birthday for our author, Kate. And we know that after hearing Kate and Anne speak, you're going to want a copy for yourselves or someone in your life. We have a limited number of signed book plates available. Please indicate you would like one of the signed book plates when you make your purchase. I also want to mention there will be time for Kate and Anne to answer questions you might have. Simply write your questions in the chat on the screen. Please don't be shy. The authors really love seeing your questions. Kate Bowler is the best-selling author of Blessed, The Preacher's Wife, and Everything Happens for a Reason. She's also an associate professor of history of Christianity in North America at Duke Divinity School. At 35, she was diagnosed with cancer. While grappling with her diagnosis, she faced conflicting feelings about her faith in a society that constantly insists on positivity, even in the face of the unwelcome news life might deal you, and our very human limitations. She discovers how our need for one another and our quest for the truth, and how to embrace the hills and valleys of being human. Her new book, No Cure for Being Human, tackles all of this with honesty, grace, and a healthy dose of wit. And there is no one better at talking about being human with honesty and wit than Anne Lamott. Anne is the best-selling author of Almost Everything, Hallelujah Anyway, Small Victories, Stitches, Health, Thanks, Wow, Some Assembly Required, Grace Eventually, Plan B, Traveling Mercies, Bird by Bird, Operating Instructions, as well as her latest book, Dusk, Night, Dawn, and many others. Anne is also an incredible support and friend to Book Passage, and we are thrilled she will be speaking with Kate today for what we know will be an incredible conversation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Kate and Anne, for being here. Congratulations on your book coming out today. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Aw, what a wonderful introduction and a surreal moment to be talking to such spectacular people. Thanks so much. And thanks, Annie. This is unbelievably special for me.
Yeah, well, congratulations, darling. And it's a beautiful book, and the reviews have been amazing. And my best friend Janine, who you know, who lost her child in January and wrote a beautiful book about it called The Opposite of Certainty. She and I read your new book together, and we just compared how incredibly bitter and jealous we were about what a beautiful writer you were and how we think you're funnier than either of us. So we're trying to work through it. Anyway, so Kate, let's start. Why don't you tell us about the new book?
Sure. I guess when I first got sick, I started really writing for the first time in a personal way, because before I'd really just been a really footnote-loving historian, and then I was taken down all the pegs, and I decided that I needed to practice writing, to practice being honest, because I was overwhelmed by the kind of cultural scripts that I was given for how to be. And at first, I realized that I was mostly just trying to stop being a problem to be solved, and I was like so hungry for advice, and so that's what ended up being this book, No Cure for Being Human, because I was looking for something to say about the place I was. So I just found myself saying, unbelievably depressing things that no one wants to say at childhood birthday parties, like, well, there's no cure for being human, little Caitlin. Enjoy blowing out those candles. They may be your last. But I was sort of trying to find a richer, gentler way of speaking about the place I found myself, which was a place of real fear and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't have an adorable cancer. You had a 4-stage colon cancer and a little boy, a small child.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, I just think it's really a bit much.
Yes, exactly. But apparently never so much that people don't have a lot of advice
I know.
About how to do it. Yeah.
I know. Why don't you pick a reading for us so we can just sort of ease into the book?
I'd love that. I picked something that I felt would feel like a confession to you personally, lovely Annie, because because it is that deep down, I've always struggled with trying not to be my own accountant, my own vicious timekeeper, always trying to cram everything into fewer and fewer minutes. So I thought I might read something from when I realized that I am sick and that I am feeling like a ticking clock, and it is making me even worse than I was before. All right. I used to experience time as productivity, consulting checklists and packing lunches and yelling, "Remember to pick up laundry detergent," to no one in particular. I had invested heavily in the science of efficiency. I had streamlined my processes, refined my habits, and adopted proven principles. I poured more and more into less and less. Now I watch my friends and family head out the door for work, errands, anything, hungry for that feeling of being propelled through the world. I am slowly realizing that I have been a human bulldozer since I was a child. My parents once returned from a trip to discover that I had renovated and staged their entire basement. "Did you know that wood paneling can be painted? I organized your record collection. I hope you weren't attached to the treadmill. It didn't work with the new floor plan." Back from college for a weekend, I came extremely close to signing the paperwork for a cabin they did not yet realize they needed. Had they ever really considered the benefits of a 4-door Toyota sedan? I oscillated between considerate and wildly presumptuous in my efforts to steamroll the shortest path between thought and action. I always wondered if I felt so at home in America because of its famous love of efficiency, an ideal untarnished since the Industrial Revolution. I teach my seminary students about Frederick Taylor, a plant foreman at the Midvale Steel Company in Nicetown, Pennsylvania in the 1880s. Marveling at how little he and his fellow workers managed to achieve in a day, Taylor developed an approach to the factory floor that, he believed, could improve the running of homes, farms, businesses, and churches. His ideas were soon adopted and adapted by the legendary Henry Ford, who revolutionized the automobile industry and manufacturing generally by breaking down complicated tasks into a series of simpler actions and units of time designed to increase productivity. Workers could now dramatically improve outputs by behaving like cogs in a single human machine. When I explain this to my divinity students, I try to sound ominous. The virtues of mass production are seductive: speed, productivity, growth. But the labor my students are preparing for is slow and inefficient. Most of the week will be spent trying to offer kindness to a deacon who never liked you anyway, or weeding heresies out of the Sunday school material you bought online. You'll spend days coming up with enough beauty and truth to fill an hour on Sunday, only to receive a dozen comments from parishioners about how much they miss the old pastor on their way out the door. If you want progress, take up running. If you want meaning, run a church. I say this with great solemnity before I rush off to a faculty meeting, where I will answer email with a lot of vigorous nodding to demonstrate my attentiveness. I deftly outmaneuver joys like naps in my attempt to winnow my inbox down to zero, garner perfect teaching evaluations, and immerse my toddler in Canadian folk music. I am a magician with a single trick. Gather round and watch how this woman can take a solitary moment and divide it into a million uses. But no one has seen me worship at the altar of productivity more than Tobin, my husband. When I woke up one morning with a stuffy nose and sore throat, I accidentally took the wrong pills. Instead of the non-drowsy decongestant, a cheerful yellow pill, I had taken the nighttime edition. Tobin found me sobbing over the toilet, desperately attempting to gag myself at 7 a.m. It was green. The pill was green, not blue. I protested, half laughing and mostly crying. "Why can't you just take a nap?" he asked sensibly. "I have so much work I want to get done. Why? Why is this happening to me?" Tobin looked around the bathroom as if surveying a crime scene. "Well," he said, "it looks like the real victim here is efficiency."
I love that. So your first book was about the history of the prosperity gospel, which preaches that God grants health and wealth to those with the right kind of faith, which apparently you do not have. I mean, look at yourself, right? So how does it feel to not have the right kind of faith?
Yeah, it was, because I'd spent 10 years writing that history. I tried to be so gentle and understanding and thinking about the kind of theological architecture for why that would feel plausible. And then when I became sort of a case study in spiritual failure, like I was the young mom whose life was a bomb, then I felt, for someone who didn't believe in the prosperity gospel, I felt a tremendous amount of shame. I still struggle with it every time I can't kind of piece my life together. It feels like everyone else has figured out some kind of, almost like their building is made of steel beams and mine just requires so many flying buttresses,
Yeah. I think everybody wants to know before we go on, you've had 6 years of a really catastrophic and confusing and really dire prognosis. And yet here you are, you finished your book and you're out on tour and you're beautiful and you're everything wonderful. But I wonder if you could just fill us in on how you are.
At first I wasn't all right at all. And we thought I would die that year. And then we thought it might be the year after that. And then I kept having these really surprising outcomes where the immunotherapy started working. And then I had a very successful, massive liver resection. And then since then, it's just a little strange being the one with cancer is not a crisis. It's a chronic condition. So I'm kind of on, like, if there's like a super highway of health, I'm on sort of the bumpy side road where I can see the cars, but some days are definitely better than others and some seasons are better than others. So I'm always a little bit rough, but I am very hopeful.
Oh. They took out a pound of liver or something?
Yeah, livers are weirdly heavy, as it turns out. And and then it grew back. It didn't grow back. It hypertrophied, which is like it swells up to fill the space. But the first thing I did was I was like, but I'll absolutely be able to pound these fries. So I've really put this sucker to the test. And so far, so good.
So let's see, on to positivity, our common enemy. We live in a world focused on striving and becoming better and somehow more in control of our health, happiness, futures, and relationships, which sadly you have not demonstrated being in great control of, which is, I think, disappointing to all of us. But you have written, or certainly are the message that we're just never quite enough. And the point seems to be if we try harder, though, and eat more keto and download another app, just the right app this time, we can wrest control of our circumstances, and then we won't be so sick or scared or sad. And it's just so incredibly powerless in this world. This especially is true mid-pandemic. And if we are, in fact, there's a kind of a whiplash going on as we foist a story about resilience on each other because we have to get to the good part, the part where we overcome, when we might just pause with one another and grieve and just not have a clue what tomorrow holds. So I wanted to ask you what happens when we have to rethink our most basic assumptions about how things are, air quote, supposed to turn out.
Oh, Annie, what a beautiful, incisive declaration about the state we're in. Because we're having to unweave so much of the fabric of our culture. There's, the main story here that we were accidentally wrapped up in is one that started over 100 years ago. And it was that our minds are the most powerful thing about us. Our minds are meant to be engines that conjure reality. And that if we could just direct it in the right way, and we could, as the kids say, manifest it in the right way. I mean, we're just continuing to recycle new and new language for the same thing, which is that self-mastery is possible for those with sharpened, refined minds. And then we've added on to that all kinds of therapeutic language that doesn't serve us in this context, where we're supposed to then achieve self-acceptance in the same moment, but also a deep surrender of our desires. But also we should only live once, and preferably it's now. And and all of this sort of heavy weight that our minds and our emotions are supposed to carry is, well, it's mostly the fault of the 1970s, she just said lovingly as a historian, but like we're having to really swim against the current of a place that we've been taken. And so that's kind of an unfair thing to do in the midst of suffering, where it's like, hey, everybody, it's the pandemic, and you have to undo your cultural conditioning, and you have to practice saying that you can't just live with, that you are not invincible. That's such a, like, I love theological language for this, like such a high anthropology. It's an absurdly elevated view of what we're capable of doing. Oh, and then we have to undo our rabid individualism. I hope America loves that. That's a new thought. And then we have to lean into a kind of finitude that we haven't seen mostly with our own eyes for 2 generations. I mean, our grandparents knew that childhood was terrifying and that life is not guaranteed. But in the meantime, we all forgot unless we were reminded by someone we love. And so I think it's just, may I just say lovingly, it's kind of it's not our fault that we became this delusional. Mm-hmm. And it's an unfair time, but it's a good time. It's a good time for honesty. It's the right time for honesty because it frees us to say all the unpleasant, horrible things. Like, I'm really scared. Holy crap, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. Oh, geez, I think interdependence is apparently going to be the way to go, even though I have none of the reflexes for it. It is a time of fragility, and that just feels wrong, even though it is right.
Yeah. I just want to read a paragraph because we're talking about real and serious sort of existential questions, and I want people to realize how really funny the book is, how often you surprise me. But let me just read one paragraph. It's pretty early on. So the family's gathered around, buzzing. Is there anything else we could be doing? They wonder. This is when the prognosis is extremely grim. I call a family meeting to discuss our time together. We sit in a grim circle around the living room with additional family and friends calling in to hear my report. I explain that I will start chemotherapy soon and have a medical device called a port inserted in my pectoral muscle to ease the burden of the drugs on my veins. Until my incisions heal, however, we must wait. I want to tell them that these next months together may be all we have. But I end up saying, thank you so much for coming. I'm very concerned that we don't have enough towels. And I want to read another one. I mean, over and over and over, I laugh out loud. This is kind of a longer one, but try and stop me. Let's see. It's a mystery to me why some mere minutes transform into moments, hovering outside of time, and how they ebb and flow, stirring wonder and the ache for more. I know the love of God who is beyond all wanting, but the more I live, the more I want and want and want. There is no such thing as a finished life, Kate, Laura said at last. Eventually we get eternity with God, but in the meantime, there's crappy regular stuff that if we're really lucky, might feel like a trip to Central Florida. It's so funny.
Thanks.
I love this book so much. And I love the title, No Cure for Being Human. What might be different if we stopped dealing with being human as if it were a disorder and instead embrace what is, including the part about this existence here being temporary? Why is this so hard for us?
Oh, it's because I was so scared that there not being enough meant that I was doing it wrong. That surely someone else had figured out the formula for it. They'd figured out how to be efficient or more present or more positive, or they had rested Joel Osteen to the ground and pulled out their best life now. I kept thinking that somebody else must know, because surely this version where the day just ends, it just ends.
Yeah.
It must mean that I missed it. And I have been missing parts of it. That has been like the deep joy of this terrible, stupid thing is really learning to rethink the math has been a privilege to do.
Haven't you always felt, even before this diagnosis, that everybody else got the owner's manual in second grade? It was the day you were home with chicken pox, and they all got it, and they have a manual, and they all know how to have pretty consistent self-esteem and to live in the present. But you were sick that day. You write in this book, nothing will add up to enough. Nothing will add up to enough. Can you talk about that and how you move forward knowing this? I guess maybe too, I had been giving these long lectures about like when especially Christian rhetoric started turning toward metrics, how we started thinking about adding up our lives. And then all day at the hospital, all I saw were numbers. I saw my blood in numbers. I saw my whatever I think I am crammed into day predictions, month predictions. And all of a sudden I realized that when I looked at it, I couldn't possibly be summed up there in any way that made any sense. That we are, I know it's so stupid, but I read this book about the French Revolution and it's turned toward what was rational. And I loved picturing these monsters transforming the map of France into a grid. And I realized, what is rational, what adds up is not necessarily what's meaningful. And that's so true of these moments we have where, the things that pop up in our mind is these like crystalline beauty, like we have some days we just have minutes, and then other days our minutes just transform into these languid moments. These moments.
And then the moments are the ones that, and I feel it every time I look at my kid with his giant Google eyes and he wonders things mostly about cars that I don't care about, but then also just about love or why people die. He's writing these very sacrilegious cartoons right now. And his wonder, and I just think, I feel bowled over with the experience of being loved like this. And then I realize, none of it's math. What a terrible metaphor,
Yeah. Well, you write a lot in both books, and I love both books. Everything happens for a reason. And what is it? And Other Truths I used to
Other
love.
Lies. Other Lies.
Other Lies I used to love, yeah. But you write a lot about the profound shift in your experiences of time and how all of a sudden you didn't know if you'd ever see your little child start kindergarten or first grade. And how have you learned to live with that and to be in the present in whatever is true at any given moment, and especially when it's not one of those sacred moments or those momentous moments you were just talking about?
Yeah, it's one of the garbage minutes, like when your plane's delayed, or when a meeting goes over and you're just feeling homicidal about someone named Linda. Initially I felt so guilty about things that just felt ordinary, because I was like, you don't understand. Like I'm on a clock here. I'm trying to get all my moments in. And I loved my friend Luke, who was explaining like, there's so many different ways we live in time. There's like the heightened drama of tragic time, which is when everything feels, like bright and your fears help you see what you love. But then there's ordinary time. There's just the getting up and then the making of the lunches and then the pretending you're not going to spend your whole evening watching Netflix. And I guess realizing that like it really is okay to not just be present all the time as if hyper reality is the goal. We can dip into the past for moments we're grateful for or still resentful about, because those are fun. We can look at the future because the future is a wonderful place. When I'm prepping for a surgery, I don't want to live in the present. Present is absolute bullshit, and I'm not interested any longer. But we're given all these ways of living because they're good for us, and maybe not to freight the moment with like every existential hope and desire.
Well, I'm trying to ask questions that I think most people in the audience would want to know, but I want to remind them that they can type any questions I'm missing into the chat and we'll get to them. But let me ask you, what don't you worry about anymore since your diagnosis?
I guess I don't worry quite so much about being, I know this is going to sound really dumb. It just shows my sort of pride, but I really wanted to be a very serious person before. You know, I picked a serious profession. We have a lot of like tweed and wine and cheese functions. And I imagined that I would be like a very serious, just professor with a feudal empire. And then I think that the humility of being sick and not being able to predict my future has made me a lot less worried about trying to get somewhere else, especially with the things with my career was the thing that was the most expensive. I paid 10 years into training for it. And now I just think, what a privilege to do it. What a joy to write hilariously specific history books. But the joy can be in the doing. It doesn't have to be in like the Masterpiece Theater soundtrack, you know? So.
I know. Well, what have you learned about living with grief?
I think grief is just love. It's just love. It's just, and it's like, it's being delicate and we grieve all kinds of things. I didn't realize I was grieving all the ridiculous futures that I'd imagined. My career as an amateur Egyptologist, I was gonna be like a very powerful Egyptologist, Annie, when I was 8, or I guess I'd seen too many retirement commercials where someone was driving along a beach and has a convertible. And I have no idea what, I didn't realize you can grieve a dream. I didn't realize you can grieve a future. I didn't realize that uncertainty is a kind of grief. Yeah. So just, I think maybe, and because I'm always scared that the things that I can't bear up the weight of the things I love. So maybe that's okay. I'm hoping that's okay.
Oh, it's beyond okay. And what truths have held up for you in hard times?
Community is for a reason. I mean, church, people, friends, like people are for a reason. Individualism is a terrible idea. Most of my good ideas are other people's ideas, just said louder and at me. So community is probably the best, least intuitive thing I've discovered. It turns out other people knew about community, but I was just hearing of it. So that, and also I guess that we're never done. We're just never done. And even today's book launch day, I was just wept with gratitude that I got to finish this book. Felt so lucky. But then today I was like, wouldn't it be fun to write a historical book on? And, and I just, it was a new ridiculous idea. So maybe we're just all never done anything.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you. It's also sort of lava lampy, time. It's not organized like I wish it was. I've written this, but I wish all of it were more like a silverware drawer where the sad, scary things go where the knives are, and then the the things that always hold up go where the big forks are, and then the kind of ambiguous things can go either way or where the salad forks are, and then the really fun things and it's not like that. It's like a lava lamp, and this kind of blurby bubble arises that is either past or future, or it's the right now, or it's an idea, or it's a memory, and it's all just sort of a mixed grill, which doesn't really work for me. I mean, it's really not efficient, but, going through a life-threatening illness can be like getting a new set of prescription glasses where everything's in sharper focus. And I'm wondering what realities have come into better focus for you.
Yeah, I guess, well, I used to kind of either live in a kind of fuzzy middle distance where nothing was exactly today, but nothing was tomorrow. It was always something I was going to do. And it was vague and it felt more like guilt, I suppose. And now I'm really good at 3-month stretches, to be honest. I'm pretty good at it. If I've got three, maybe it's because I learned scan intervals, but I'm very good at dreaming new plausible things that cut through the noise of the terrible. So, I mean, I just think it's very funny that this is an impulse now, but recently, as just a weird aside, I was bitten by a poisonous snake and I had to be in the hospital. I also got to walk into a hospital and yell, "I've been poisoned," which I found very funny. But I was in the hospital and my very first thought, because I was hooked up to everything and it was really depressing and painful. And then I thought, I wonder if I know anyone who works with sharks. And it turns out I do. And cut to 2 weeks later, I got to pull dinosaurs out of the ocean. But I'm very good at that impulse, which is I'm very good at now the near future. And the near future, I can hook it right into the present. And I think that may be a skill.
Yeah, really, that's an incredible skill to have. My really beloved friend David Roach is the pastor of the Church of 80% Sincerity, and it's ROCHE, and he talks about how 80% of anything is a miracle. Like 80% of faith, having faith and optimism 80% of the time, or being honest 80% of the time. And so instead of saying this bullshit, such as, "I will love you until all eternity," you might say, "Darling, I will love you all the way through dinner." And that once you move into the 80%, it's kind of all sorts of things are doable, that you can do it. You can do the rest of the day, right? Yeah, I know I can do the rest of the day. I want to read another passage I really love that to give people a sense of just how profound and human and true. In the meantime, we are stuck with our beautiful, terrible finitude, our gossip and petty fights, self-hatred and refusal to check our voicemail. We get divorced, waste our time, and break our own hearts. We are cobbled together by the softest material, laughter and pets and long talks with old friends, by God's unscrupulous love and by communities who give us a place to belong. And there is nothing particularly glamorous about us, except that we have moments when we are shockingly magnanimous before forgetting about it the next day. How lucky then that we are not failing. Our lives are not problems to be solved. We can have meaning and beauty and love, but nothing even close to resolution. It's just it's both so infuriating and the root of all liberation.
Yes.
To understand that no one has something that we're positive we can have too if we just break the code. I mean, that's the prosperity gospel, right? Is that there's a code you can break, have the right kind of faith, and then you will get amply rewarded with the health and the wealth. And this book is saying stuff no one has ever said, which is like, yeah, right. Because you're Exhibit A, Do you think believers, which both you and I are, do you think we need to have hope? or that we're somehow really disappointing God?
Oh, I was so stuck on hope because I was so angry about it. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think partly I had been. It felt like a kind of poison the way people were using it with me, because I guess the way it had been framed is it felt like it was returning to another kind of math, like you're terrible plus your time on earth equals, but then like the thing that balances it out is going to be heaven is spectacular. God is drawing, that all of the promises of tomorrow would balance out today. And so I thought, well, screw hope. Like what a dumb kind of deferral. Because what I want is I want the smell of my son's skin, and I want to, I don't know, ever finish a 5K. And I'd like things now, thanks. And so for a long time, I was really resentful about people using the language of hope, until I realized that it was, it's because I work with these beautiful like theologians and do-gooders all the time who just kind of roam the hallways telling me what to believe. And they're not wrong. And it turns out that as Jesus-y people, which you and I are, that we are required not just to have courage, not just to have the ability to face down the reality of today, but to believe that we are being drawn into a story about love that is also not ours, but belongs to all of us. And that forces us to be people of hope. I think I just had to give up on the idea, though, that hope meant that my life was going to work out, even though obviously it is the most important one to me. but that this is a story about us and not just me.
Yeah. Well, I think also we sometimes experience briefly going from hoping that this or that happens and we will be made whole and all well and things will fall into place. And we move into the hope in, as you said, our community. The hope is in what Martin Luther King calls the beloved community. And the hope in that no matter what happens to you, you're safe, and your child's safe. Your child's safe, whatever happens to you. And that's hard to believe because we're both sort of like really sweet, funny versions of Leona Helmsley in terms of having clipboards and Post-its and a belief that we have excellent ideas that everybody should come around to.
Absolutely.
But the hope in the love of one another, the hope of no matter what happens, we actually are safe in goodness and in this one thing that when all else is gone, we understand that we were made out of love, we were made for love, we are made to love. And when everything else falls away, if we want to have loving feelings, all we have to do is do a few loving things, and we get reminded of this love thing. And that's where I think both of us have put our hope in. Yeah. And, some days are just too long. There's no getting around that. But,
totally.
I love what you said in Publishers Weekly a few months ago. I'll just read it. Many people given a fatal diagnosis would make a bucket list of all the things they want to see and do. This is the questioner. You suggest a different list. Count what you can't live without. Why? And then you wrote, it is much easier to count items than to know what counts. God, it is much easier to count items than to know what counts. With all the pressure to be positive that people expect and the notion that we're supposed to battle, air quotes, our illness and then die cheerfully, I did feel it was my place to be honest. There is no cure for being human. We have finite resources in numbered days, and we have to live these days as we are.
Annie, I'm only saying that because you could read that back to me every day and I'd be like, that is a good idea. Because I'm always 2 seconds away from going back to being an accountant. Yeah. Just tell me how to add it up.
I know.
And then every day trying to, whenever you say safe, Annie, I just feel like that's why I need the people that I love and trust. Because when you say it, I believe you. And like, isn't that so unreal that we need other people to look at us and to say things that only God and other people can make true? Because it's unbelievable until you say it. It is.
Yeah. We do a Sunday school exercise I've told you about. I mean, my Sunday school's at a failing church of 30 people. So I might have 3 kids in my class, a 7-year-old and a teenager with acne, and then a 10-year-old girl who could like hold down a job. She could be a receptionist somewhere. And I do a thing called Loved and Chosen with them, loved and chosen and safe. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, is anyone here wearing a sort of magenta maroon crew neck sweater with a neon sign behind them? And then you know how little kids are. They're like, they look around and then they go, oh, Annie. And then I go, yes, Kate. And then you'll say, and then I'll go, Kate, you know what? Look at me. You are loved and chosen and safe. And then I'll say, why don't you come sit next to me? And then I'll say, usually it's like, does anybody here have Pokemon shoelaces?
Yeah.
And then but we're loved and as is. That's the weirdness of Christianity, is that point is both very clear and then absolutely not believed by 90% of Christians, that it's a come as you are. Like my friend Tom famously said, and I get credit for that, you can tell you created God in your own image when he hates all the same people you do. Yeah. But you, I just want you to look at me for a second. I want to just tell you, you are so safe. You are so safe. I love something that also that people can go back last week to the Washington Post. I think it was last week, wasn't it? Your editorial in the Post. And just Google it and you'll find it. Every year, billions of dollars are pumped into a wellness industry defined by the theory that we can be perfected. That is the basis of our life here I'm adding this, on Earth and in America. And now back to you. We can organize ourselves, heal ourselves, budget ourselves, love ourselves, track ourselves, and eat well enough to make ourselves whole. The problem with our lives is that we cannot solve them. We can only live them. From that bookstore, I could see this is from a story you tell, I could see no formula that would get me the upgrade and guarantee my growth or use my cancer to teach me. Instead of my best life now, I'll have to settle into life now. The way the light streaks in through the blinds in this room, the way the nurse allows me to pretend he is a vampire who hoards these bright red vials of blood for his own sinister purposes, the way I'm sure it will be the okayest day yet. Wow. So we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I think that Reese and Sam will be able to get me them. Okay, from Laura. What have the people around Kate who have supported her the best done to help her?
Because there are so many different ways to be the friend to the terrible. And I loved the people who they leaned into what they were good at. They made food or sent a gift card, or they sent dumb memes, or just told me anyone who tells me a funny story, I'm like ready to run away with them. That was always for me, my little heart language. But I think it changed though over the years, because at first I was the building on fire. And then gradually, maybe it became a different kind of friend. For me now, it's just the friend that doesn't forget. It's just the friend who pops in every now and then and says, things seem fine, but I imagine they might not be, or just sends a little encouraging word. Crisis versus chronic friends are kind of different breeds sometimes. Sometimes they're the same magic person. So, and I kind of have grace for all of it. So I feel very lucky when people try at all. So whatever kind of friend you are, I think that's the okay kind. And it's okay to do whatever feels like it's in your wheelhouse to do.
And so much of the book is really chronicling your friends and family and what worked and what was medicine and what blew your mind and what filled you and nourished you. And also, how awful, and the listening, just listening as a grace, but also what a nightmare it is for somebody to have a little Christian bumper sticker that they hand you.
Yeah. It's hard to say, if I'm just being uncharitable for a moment, it's hard to say who was the worst, but sometimes it was people's Christian certainties. Other times it was just anyone who'd recently discovered essential oils or smoothies. I mean, it was, the people who were always trying to nudge me toward something they had discovered, which always comes out of love, but usually came out of a documentary they'd recently seen and very much wanted me to understand the contents of.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. All you can say is thank you for sharing and not lose any of your life force
Yes,
responding. Right. Okay, here's a question from Burnt Hills UMC. How does your wisdom and humor play with your seminary students? What do you hope they will learn about being human?
Oh, and bless you for UMC. Gosh, that's United Methodist Church. I work at a United Methodist seminary, and they are, and this last year, I think any hopes I had for my little pastor students were, I have been blown away by the humanity that they poured into chaplaincy this last year. They are beyond what I could teach them at this point. But my hope is that as we grow in knowledge, that it makes us more flexible. It makes us more kind of limber with our faith. Because at first we're just trying to build up what we know. And I think that's kind of a fun part of learning anything. And especially if you go to seminary, you learn like 200 new, very specific words. I remember mostly I wanted to talk about Kierkegaard and then to decide whether it was pronounced Kierkegaard or Kierkegaard, because that made me feel very special. But in sort of giving up our uniqueness and learning to just hold people's deep humanity. And that is normally just what you were saying, Annie, about being that loving presence, about being willing to be embarrassed by going with people where you don't always know the answer, but following them there and keeping pace.
And also just this friendship thing is so much I've experienced of just being willing to feel like total shit with someone, not to fix it or not to, paint it, put cute new nail polish on it, and just to sit there and to say two things are true. You're safe, you're loved out of all sense of proportion, and this sucks. Yeah. And if I were God's West Coast representative, I would have, and I'd be very, very good at that, I would have a magic wand, and I would have the ability to change things like really by right after lunch tomorrow. Yes. And instead for somebody to sit there and go, boy, do I not have a clue, but, at your service.
Yeah.
There's another really good question. I wanted to ask before I go to their good questions. Can you just talk to us for a few minutes about grace? I always say it's spiritual WD-40, and that you spritz, that you receive the spritzing of when you are clenched and stuck and stiff. But can you talk, you're a theologian, can you talk about grace?
Oh, Annie, I don't think I'm nearly good on grace as you are. I only know now that most of the amazing experiences we can have, like forgiving someone who doesn't deserve to be forgiven, or loving just a steaming pile of garbage of a person, or feeling okay when something terrible has happened. The only thing I know is that we can just be surprised by God's shocking presence only because God draws near to the suffering. I do know that. The less we have, the more that is when we're broken open and other people's love and God's love pours in. So that's kind of my only, I know theologically I'm supposed to really know that it's there's a huge debate about whether it's a gift or whether we participate with it, or whether it's seeing, as Willie Jennings, who's a theologian friend, says, it's seeing the world through God's eyes. But I just know that it's how I feel when I am shocked that I am somehow not undone when I should be.
Yeah.
That's all
You're not as far gone and mentally ill as you were a few minutes ago. And that's a miracle every time, isn't it? It's like water wings, that when you think you're going down and it turns out you're still afloat. Or it's a second wind, speaking of 5Ks, when you are completely done and you stop for a second, someone gives you a sip of water and you're back in the saddle. So here's a question from Teresa. Have you gone down the path of alternative therapies, or whatever they're called these days?
Well, for cancer, I no, because I was on a very strict clinical trial where I really wasn't allowed to do much of anything except what I was given. But I have had chronic health issues around my joints, and that took me down many an alternative path. I ended up researching the history of a lot of them, because a lot of them have like spiritual foundations, like for instance, the field of chiropractics. So I have always, so anything that kind of had more spiritual dimensions, like that I'd have to have a certain mindset or openness, I have had a lot of experience with and written a lot historically about. But but when it comes to cancer, it's been very hospital gown for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So Mavis Moon asks, I'll just read this. What you say about communion is beautiful, and we have that with the church, at least ideally. So I wonder, why is being a part of the church so unimportant and unwanted by so many?
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, for the last 50 years, we've seen an erosion of trust in institutions, because institutions have failed us in so many ways, the church being one of them. And especially, I'm just speaking in an American context, the erosion of the feeling of safeguards and the rise of internalized capitalism makes us feel like we're supposed to do it on our own, and then we should only be using individualistic solutions. And I think the church, I had like one of those very adorably awkward churches growing up, like very nobody belonged to another church, and because they weren't really welcome and they were a little weird. And now I'm grateful for it, not just because it didn't have a fog machine, but because I learned that belonging is a chosenness, and we have to choose each other. And and when you're chosen, then if you're the one whose life explodes, people will begin to choose you. So I guess that's what I'm hoping for people, is during this time of tremendous loneliness and rightful institutional mistrust, that they feel chosen by some lovely people who are happy to carry them.
Yeah. I have another question from Jody Schaff, and then I had one last question of my own. I think then we're going to have to go. But how do you embrace or stay in the moments of quiet that can be so uncomfortable? Maybe you breathe.
Oh man, well, because quiet is so hard. It's so hard because then I'm lonely, or then I'm scared, or then I'm anxious, or that irritated feeling you get when you know something's supposed to be done, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And the quiet to me is it's breathing. And I like these really simple prayers. I have just this one I use all the time just for the moment, which is just, God, let me see the world as it is. And it helps me settle in.
The world as it is, what a concept.
Just for now, that would be okay.
Yeah. Okay, so as we close up our time today, I wonder if you would tell us how to live a good enough life with massive uncertainty and a really, really scary cancer and a little boy in tow. What is the recipe?
Yeah. Oh, Annie, I would buy it. I would buy it now. I would mortgage my house for that. Living without one is just the hardest bit of all. Yeah. And it creates the big void of the unknowing that we have to trust that the love, just the sheer force of love will fill. That's why every day is going to feel half full and half empty. Just that the emptiness, every day, that's the miracle, that we get enough in that day just to be loved through our undoneness and our unfinishedness. So today, the miracle is now. It was this beautiful conversation. So I'm all set for today. And so I guess I'll see you guys here tomorrow.
Well, we'll talk. I want to read one more thing before we go. I just marked up so much of the book, especially just the your beautiful, tough sense of humor. But I really laughed out loud a number of times. So I think I have time just to squeeze this in. My hospital room is a turnstile of colleagues and friends, almost all of whom are pastors, and one bishop just to jazz things up. So they bless the crap out of me. They kiss my wet cheeks and bust out all the instruments that the church packs into its spiritual toolkit. Prayers for healing and for peace, hands laid heavily on my shoulders and head as they invite God's presence, anointing oils that smell like Christmas, which they apply to my forehead in a greasy cross. I am convinced that by the time I am ready to leave the hospital, I will have acne there in the shape of a cross. I close my eyes when they stand around the bed, singing hymns with their naked voices. For a minute there, I am whole. For a minute there, I am whole. And I think we have to go. I think Louise is going to come back and say things that are true and efficient, but I just love you, Kate, and I am at your service. You.
What a gift. This was such an amazing, amazing moment for me. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
Gorgeous you.
Good.
This really was amazing. I'm so sad I have to be the efficiency fairy and end it because you guys just could listen to it forever. This is, as you said in the beginning, the time for honesty, and I felt like that was really beautiful, everything you guys talked about, and funny too, and terrible. It was incredible. I love you guys. Thank you so very much for this today. And thank you everybody that tuned in for this really special event. I want to remind you, have copies of this book, No Cure for Being Human, this incredible book, and a limited number of signed book plates from Kate available in the store. Congratulations, Kate, on your book coming out today. And I hope you have a wonderful time promoting it out there.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been such a joy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, everyone.